The Alaska Native Art Auction Gala is March 21st, 2026 in Anchorage, Alaska. Donate artwork by February 27th, 2026 and be eligible to win $500. Help sustain Indigenous-led media, including National Native News. Donor forms and details are found at knba.org.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. In a very short time, artificial intelligence has advanced to the point where it's often hard to tell whether what we're seeing is real or not. And the technology is readily available to everyone. And that is already fueling concerns over a new kind of appropriation. Vaguely native characters soliciting likes and follows on your For You page. Is there a way to stop AI before it devolves into cultural appropriation? We'll ask experts right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The New Mexico Office of Broadband Access and Expansion has announced more than $900 million in investments towards broadband infrastructure with the help of both federal and state support. Some of the funds will go to the Navajo Nation. KUNM's Jeanette Didios has more.
Among the 17 projects announced, the Navajo Nation was awarded $111 million. That's the largest single supported project from the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, also known as BEAD. Sonia Nez manages the Navajo Nation Broadband Office. She says the project will affect 11,000 households across New Mexico's portion of the Navajo Nation. She also says an effort to bring broadband to the community like this has never been done before.
Telehealth, education, across the whole spectrum, it lifts the people up to a new level where there was no connectivity before, but now they will have connectivity at the home. And so it just opens a whole door of opportunity for the people. Businesses, entrepreneurship, education, across the whole spectrum.
Nez says tribal members continue to face challenges without broadband.
So without internet connection, for example, to get college education, you have to go off the reservation. You have to go into the cities, So this will give them opportunity to have school right there at home and then not have to leave the nation,
Nez says the BEAD program will help more homes have broadband service. She also says the Navajo Nation is working to establish broadband in all chapter houses and install 5G towers for mobile internet. For National Native News, I'm Jeanette Didios.
Kipnuk was one of the western Alaska villages hit hardest by the remnants of a typhoon in October. Residents are voting on whether they want to rebuild their community or relocate to higher ground. The Alaska Desk's Ayolna Naiden reports.
Raina Paul sits in an Anchorage office, scrolling through a spreadsheet filled with hundreds of names of Kipnik tribal members.
We're just like on A's.
Paul is in charge of the village's voting process. Over the next several days, she and her team will call every single adult tribal member, that's about 900 people, and ask them, do they want to rebuild the village in its current location or move to higher ground?
It's very important for us to find out what the tribal members from Kipnik want.
Last fall's disastrous winds and flooding destroyed homes and infrastructure and contaminated land and water. Most of Kipnik's residents remain evacuated, including Paul. She says she wants the future Kipnik to be safe.
We love our community. We miss our community. We're doing it for our future generations to come, because they might not know what to do when this happens again. I think we're just going to be hit with many, many storm events.
The first community meeting about whether to relocate happened about a week ago. The decision to start voting followed swiftly. Cheryl Musgrove directs the Climate Justice Program under the Alaska Institute for Justice. She says the village needs to act fast to make the most of both the short construction season and the available funding for disaster recovery.
They don't have decades. They need to do it immediately. So that's my hope, is that they can show other communities that are going to be faced with this in the future that you can rebuild someplace else, if that's what they decide, on a short timeline as the disaster recovery process.
Right now, Kipnik leadership is looking at 2 sites for relocation. Both spots are located on higher ground. During the voting process, Paul and her team of 4 are also asking residents if they want to suggest any other sites. In Anchorage, I'm Alona Naidin.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, we fight to restore stability, dignity, and justice. Bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Hear that? Tribal college faculty do so much, one can't say it all here. Nothing but respect. Visit mostthoroughdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Native Americans have worked for decades to counter stereotypes perpetuated in old films and television. Now, artificial intelligence is presenting a new challenge to that progress. Scores of AI-generated images and videos flood social media pages. Creating this content is easily accessible to anyone who can type prompts into AI generators that scrape information from millions of sources. Often posted by anonymous creators, AI content featuring native visual and audio characteristics usually have little or no authentic cultural connections. Along the way, they generate hundreds of thousands of admirers who take it at face value and generate profits for the creators. In this hour, we'll talk with native technology and social science experts about the new threat of AI cultural appropriation. We'll also get reminders on what people can do to keep from being taken advantage of. You can join our conversation. Just call 1-800-996-2848. Have you been fooled by fake AI content? Share your story. We're at 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's meet today's guests. Joining us first while traveling through Four Corners area in New Mexico is Dr. Angelo Baca. He is a professor of history, philosophy, and social sciences at the Rhode Island School of Design. He is Dene and Hopi. Angelo, good morning, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Yes, good morning. Yat e bene. Good to be back on the show.
Great to have you back, Angelo. Joining us from Irvine, California, we have Trevor Reed. He is a professor of law at the University of California Irvine School of Law and an associate justice for the Hopi Tribe Court of Appeals. And of course, he is Hopi. Trevor, good morning and welcome back to you also.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
And joining us on Zoom from Sydney in New South Wales, Australia, is Dr. Tamika Worrell. She is a senior lecturer of critical Indigenous studies at Macquarie University, and she is Gamilaroi. Tamika, a very good morning to you, and welcome to our show, Native America Calling.
Yeah, Martin, thank you for having me.
Angelo, I'm going to begin with you because we've discussed cultural appropriation on this show with you before, and we often start by defining it. As Native people, though, we might just say, hey, we know it when we see it. But how do you introduce the topic and talk about appropriation?
Well, I like to remind folks about the impacts of cultural appropriation are really a dehumanizing method of objectifying people down to just things or objects that don't have any feelings or emotions. And that is the danger of being stereotyped and placed into categorical tropes that do not see Native people as human beings, which is why historically there have been a number of atrocities that have been done to our people and still continue on in certain parts of the world today. So it's important for us to do this anti-stereotype work and educate people on our culture, language, history, and the the fact that we still exist, we're still here, and we're prominently thinking about the past, the present, and the future simultaneously all together. So this is one of those things where artificial intelligence makes it a potential challenge for the future.
Angelo, it's just nothing short of astounding how far AI has advanced in just a very short time frame. How difficult is it for the average person to discern now between what is AI and what is reality?
I think it's important for people to become media literate and to understand how these technologies work and function. But it's also incredibly important for Indigenous folks, for Native people, to know who they are. You have a cultural grounding in their spiritual, cultural, and Indigenous ways. Just knowing who they are, where they're from, and what their community means to them is important for us to navigate no matter what time period, what technology, or what kind of messaging that exists out in the world.
Are there some specific traits that people can be on the lookout for to identify what might be AI-generated content?
Well, it used to be that it was really simple to identify AI-generated content with some of the hallucinations or the 5 or 6 fingers or, like an extra arm or appendage that would pop out. But these softwares and engines have become so sophisticated that we really can't tell anymore. And I think that it's quite alarming when you see some of these pages that are all AI deepfake videos that people consider them to be real and don't know the difference between what is real and what is not. And that just emphasizes the fact that there's quite a large amount of ignorance still for the public at large, but also for users of the technology.
Facebook is one place you can find suspicious AI-generated videos of Indigenous people. Let's hear one of them, where a vaguely Indigenous man looks into a camera with other members of his family looking on in a wintry outdoor background. He then makes the following plea to viewers.
Wait just 1 second, American people. If this video appears while you are scrolling and you're not bothered by Indigenous people like us, will you stand with us? If yes, press that follow button and honor our journey. Respect.
That is from a Facebook account named Native American Sunlow Vibes, which started posting similar versions of the same message a month ago. The Facebook profile has more than 400,000 followers. Angelo, let's unpack this here. Are there any redeeming qualities in these posts or any positive impact on Native representation in your view?
Well, it's a really great question because this is essentially amounts to what would be considered digital red face, where you had people in Hollywood who are not Native dressing up as Indians and portraying themselves to be as such. And, if you look at the top of the page, it says satire and parody. And so what does that really mean? How do we unpack that? Because that means if they're going into it, they know that it has a certain malicious quality to it, that there's stereotyping happening here, that the comments get sincere responses, even though it is not taken seriously and it is a joke to whoever is making this, and so therefore is making fun of everyone else who thinks that this is real. So it gets these sincere responses, and it's just an indication that the American public is pretty much starved for Indigenous input, accurate representation, and storytelling that comes from these communities. So on the far end of this, we can kind of see that it's one of the missing parts of the stories and the media representations that exist. And so because they don't know about us, they are only making these guesses of what they think we look like, sound like, and would talk about. The majority of those posts all have the same script. They're talking about, having this, respect for Native people. If you're scrolling, so they're really obviously, they're fishing for viewers. They don't have any content. There's nothing there that's authentic, accurate, or honest.
So it appears here the goal is to gain followers, and like with this example here, over 400,000 followers. It appears like they're succeeding here, right?
Correct. And this account is fairly new and recent, and it's gotten all of these thousands of views. And so, I would wonder what that would look like if we could get the same amount of views to actual, accurate, authentic, real content for real Native American folks. It might actually make a difference. So, I think it's kind of interesting when you look at it. The cultural appropriation piece is a degree removed from the person actually doing it. Someone could make these things anonymously and never be called out for it.
Okay. Well, you mentioned like what the impact is on actual Native content producers, and I'm just thinking of our own show here, right? And we have 4 people and our production crew, most of whom are Native, working very hard to put these shows together every day. And Facebook, is the social media platform that I pay the most attention to. And Angela, we're pretty excited after a show if we can get maybe 30 likes for one of our shows on Facebook, and here these folks are coming along and they're getting just clicks and clicks. And I'm just sitting here scratching my head, and I can't help but think to myself, what are we doing wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's precisely, I think, what every Indigenous person who's doing real work out in the real world is thinking. Clearly, artificial intelligence is being misused and abused in a way that doesn't serve the people or the public. And it makes me think about we should really question from our own tribal nation perspectives and our own cultural lenses, how useful is it for us? And what are the pros and cons, the positives and negatives for using such a technology, especially if it isn't made for us, it isn't intended for us, it was never made in consultation with us. And, a lot of the times, as history has shown, that our data, our information, our own information about our people has been weaponized against us. So naturally, there's a disconnect and a distrust with many Native communities when it comes to AI.
All right, anybody listening right now, if you know what we're talking about here with regard to this AI-generated Native content, and I know many of you do, maybe some of you have seen some of these videos on the Facebook account named Native American Sunlow Vibes. We'd really like to hear your thoughts. What's your take with regard to AI cultural appropriation? Give us a call. The number is 1-800-996-2848. More with Angelo and our other guests when we come back on the other side of this short break. Jim Gray led the Osage Nation at a crucial time for the Oklahoma tribe. His leadership helped secure Osage self-governance status. He was instrumental in affirming voting rights for Osage citizens. We'll hear from his family and friends about Jim Gray's many contributions to others, both on and off the Osage Reservation. That's on the next Native America Calling.
Support by the American Indian College Fund. The American Indian College Fund provides millions of dollars of scholarships to thousands of Native students every year. Tribal citizens of every age and experience are eligible. The deadline for applications is May 31st, and you can find everything you need to apply at collegefund.org. That's collegefund.org, or by phone at 800-766-FUND. Education is the answer.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling today. We are talking about technological cultural appropriation. How does AI harm authentic Native representation? Is your tribal community or organization working on AI policies? You can join this conversation. You can let us know by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Our first guest, Dr. Angelo Baca, is a professor of history, philosophy, and social sciences at the Rhode Island School of Design. And Angela, let's put a little bit of nuance on this conversation, because earlier we were talking about non-native content generators, people who create these Facebook accounts with AI images of native people or videos. But how about this? What if the content like this is generated by an indigenous person? Does that make any difference?
I think it does make a difference because, there's a certain sense of cultural protocols, respect, and consent and permission that should be taken with any native storyteller, producer, media maker, anyone who knows that inherently there is tied to all of our communities a certain expectation of respect, transparency, of, showing that you are connected intergenerationally as much as possible by telling these stories and being empowered with them. It has always been in our culture a respected position of being a storyteller, and that doesn't change regardless of the technology. I think if we are to understand how these technologies work and what they really mean to the impact of our future generations, we also have to go back and understand, so what would our elders think of this? What would our leaders say about this? And can they be also intellectually and spiritually clear and critiquing of such a technology? Because this doesn't change anything. It would be the same as with a camera or with a video or with a podcast or recording with audio. Like any time that we're doing some of this sharing with media, certain things should be understood, explained, respected, especially if you're an indigenous or Native American media maker connected to communities that have responsibilities and accountability.
Angela, when you mentioned what would our ancestors think, what would the elders, I just can imagine right now, I'm thinking of my late grandparents, and they're sitting on their couch and they're just scratching their heads and they're saying, "Grandson, I just don't know. Grandson, I just don't know about that." That's exactly what they would say. Well, what about tribes? Angelo, are any taking action right now to protect against cultural appropriation? Any kind of organized efforts?
Well, currently there is a critical mass of Native scholars here in the United States and all over the world that are focused on some of these issues. Everything ranging from intellectual property, patents, copyrights, trademarks, but also the newest developing field of artificial intelligence. Here in the U.S., there's quite a bit of interest from different tribal nations that have been taking the lead, including Navajo Nation, on some of these issues, like the Chickasaw Nation, the Cherokee Nation, and the Yaqui, really going forward and putting some of this in policy positions and thinking about laws and standards in ways that we want to have guidelines and, some direction on how to use this and in which ways are better than others. And I think that's really important in this time during this 10-year moratorium in the United States on artificial intelligence regulation. We actually could be thinking about these things, enacting and enabling our sovereignty by having these guide rails put in place with our tribal nations and really taking a strong stance about what is good for our nation's citizens.
All right, Angelo, thank you for kicking off this conversation. Our first guest, 1-800-99-NATIVE, for those of you who would like to weigh in on this discussion with regard to AI cultural appropriation. And with that, let's bring in our next guest, Trevor Reed, professor of law at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, also an associate justice for the Hopi Tribe Court of Appeals. And Trevor, you have also viewed this profile we talked about earlier, Native American Sunlow vibes. What are your initial thoughts?
I have to say the first thing I thought was, wow, this is weird. But, I think it nicely illustrates pretty much all the dangers of AI. You've got in the video, you have grandma and grandpa in buckskin sitting out there in some mountain valley with snow all around, and they're sitting by a fire. And, someone in the video is holding like this large basket, but there's like steam coming out of it. And anyways, it's just all kinds some guys fiddling with some kind of rope over on the corner. It's just weird, right? And yet, it fits and it does exactly what AI is supposed to do, right? It predicts what the majority of people think something looks like, and then it puts that into an image, and that's kind of what we see, right? And you can kind of see why 400,000 people would say, "Oh, this must be authentic. I'm going to follow it," just because it fits up with all of those stereotypical things, even though it's completely fake, right? And I think that's the challenge right now: is how do we deal with that, right? How would a tribe combat that, or how would Indigenous peoples try to shut that down? And I think we have a number of legal mechanisms to do that, but really it's so pervasive all over the internet, it's hard to control.
Well, let's talk more about potential legal mechanisms. Are there intellectual property laws that protect Native Americans against cultural appropriation?
There are lots of intellectual property tools out there. The challenge is that they all have weaknesses, and unfortunately those weaknesses are right where Indigenous peoples are vulnerable, right? So for example, copyright, you probably heard, protects creative artists from having their work be appropriated by others. The general rule is that if somebody copies your art or your music or your writing without your permission, you could potentially sue them for copyright infringement, up to $150,000 per case of willful infringement, right? But when you see AI copy somebody's art or music and then somebody sells that online, there's some questions about whether you can potentially sue AI for infringement. It seems like that might be pretty straightforward. I think the harder cases right now are situations where AI is ingesting a lot of tribal creativity, a lot of tribal information, cultural material, sensitive things. And, the question is, how can we stop that before that happens? There are some big cases being decided right now, trying to figure out whether or not you could sue for copyright infringement and protect that kind of material from appropriation, but we are still probably another year or so away from getting real answers on those.
And Trevor,
probably a better tool. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just quickly, in that situation, who would you sue? The platform or the content creator? Who's ultimately the defendant in a lawsuit like that?
I think right now a lot of the big cases are against these AI platforms, and it's mostly authors that are suing these platforms and hoping to either shut it down or get a big settlement of some kind. However, who is the real person? As Dr. Baca was just saying, usually it's the person that's entering the prompt saying, "Hey, I want to have a native-looking guy sitting there in a mountain valley on a video." That's the person that's really using AI like a camera or a tool of some kind to create something. And that's the person that probably should be liable. But at the same time, these AI industry folks are gathering up all of this data and not asking for permission before they do it. In some ways, they're enabling people to go out there and make these kinds of cultural appropriations. And so it seems like both should be liable.
What about in terms of regulation? I'm thinking the federal government and also possibly states. What kind of traction are you seeing there?
I think a lot of people are concerned. Last I checked, almost all 50 states have passed some sort of protection against what we call deep fakes. And a lot of these deepfake laws, they tackle different things, but a lot of them mirror a protection that we know of called the right of publicity. And right of publicity basically protects your name, your likeness, your image, sometimes the sound of your voice, sometimes your persona. Basically protects your identity from being appropriated and used without your permission. And, to be honest, the right of publicity could potentially protect Native people, non-Native people from these kinds of AI appropriations. The problem is that right of publicity differs from state to state and from tribe to tribe. And it also doesn't protect groups of people, right? It doesn't protect, clans. It doesn't protect tribes. It doesn't protect communities. It's really an individual kind of protection. And so if you're trying to protect some kind of a cultural image or a cultural identity, it doesn't really offer you any kind of protection. We have, however, seen some tribes developing right of publicity protections that look pretty good, right? They'll protect individuals' identities well into the future, right? Some of them protect your identity after you die, and that could potentially be used for deepfake, combating deepfakes and cultural appropriations. But really, protecting culture with the tools out there that we have is pretty tough, and we don't really have anything that's a solid win for tribes protecting against cultural appropriation.
Trevor, you're part of a new clinic that's focused on this issue. Tell us more about it and what you hope to achieve here in the legal realm.
Yeah, so here at UC Irvine, and also I have a colleague, Jane Anderson at NYU, and a number of colleagues around the country, both law firms and also academics. We're putting together an AI and Indigenous innovation clinic. And the idea is that folks that are experiencing these kinds of cultural appropriations, or folks that are having their own artwork or other creative work being appropriated, they could call in and get services, get some help combating this using the different legal tools that we have available. The other idea is that we'd also like to help tribes develop AI policy. We know that a number of tribes, like Dr. Baca mentioned, a number of tribes here in the U.S. are already developing AI protocols, AI legislation, AI policies, and we're starting to see some of those emerge, and it's a really exciting time. And what we're hoping to do is provide some legal expertise to help folks as they're developing those policies, help people think about the different tools that they could include in their tribal code, and then think about implementation and what kinds of protections they'd want for their community. So, our AI Indigenous Innovation Clinic is really there to help people as this technology emerges and draw on all of the different folks in our national community for support.
Trevor, it just seems like ultimately so much of this depends on how we use the technology in creating that balance, because we have to be mindful, like you're sharing, that there are some really enormous benefits from AI as well, right? So how do we kind of just go forward as people and as Native people and as societies and find the right balance between, smart, healthy uses of AI, and then some of these but just bizarre actors out there that are creating some of this weird content?
No, that's absolutely right. I think AI has tremendous potential, and we're already seeing tribes using it to advance their work, to be able to do their work faster, better. And I think there are a lot of potential also in the creative sphere. I saw an artwork by Stephen Yazzie the other day that involves AI and does some incredible stuff. I think for tribal artists, AI has great capacity because it gives people access to tools and the ability to create in ways that they maybe couldn't afford or maybe couldn't get access to. And so it's a great equalizer in that way. The problem, though, is that AI also has a lot of pitfalls, like we've been talking about. And so it's really incumbent on tribes to balance those things, balance creative expression and free speech and those kinds of principles. The tribes are very innovative. They're places where creativity flourishes. We have incredible Indigenous artists, and so it makes sense that they go down into the AI space and start to explore, right? But at the same time, we have to have these protections in place. Fortunately, a lot of tribes have done a lot of the groundwork already. I wouldn't say most tribes, but a lot of our tribes have research codes already, and it would be a quick step to say, hey, not only are we going to regulate research by humans, we're going to regulate research and training by AI databases, right? And just expand their research code protections, requiring free, prior, and informed consent. Expand that out to AI and AI developers. We've already seen tribes start to make deals with big media and also big tech companies, setting the ground rules for how AI should use tribal data. And that's exciting to see. But I think even more collaborative work could potentially be on the table too. And you can imagine legislation appearing where tribes come together and seek special kinds of protections, either from the United States government, from Congress, or potentially coming together and drafting common legislation. So there's a lot of possibility out there, but really the balance comes down to the tribe itself.
All right. Thank you, Trevor. We have a couple of minutes before we have to take the next break, and I want to pivot back to Dr. Angelo Baca. And Angela, I also would like you to weigh in because earlier you mentioned, what would our ancestors think? What would our elders think? What about our children? Because I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I think it's interesting because she's now like growing up as part of this, and she uses a lot of AI stuff. She's always on Copilot and Gemini, creating little images and things like this. But how do we introduce what's happening now, especially with this native appropriation through AI, to our young people in our families and our communities?
Well, I think that's a really great question because it is going to be a part of their lives and their reality. And I think it's a challenge for, just middle-aged adults, let alone elders, to understand like what the impacts of this tech could have on their lives. And I think that more than ever, we've seen that AI capacities have been built into a lot of softwares that we use on a daily basis, everything from our emails to our text chains to even having our recommendations for the internet surfing that we do. And so thinking about all of that, it really is incumbent upon us to teach them about what the pitfalls might be. So as, Dr. Reed there is talking about becoming informed, educated, and demystifying the complexity of what this possible technology might mean for our lives is important, especially for young people. They have no fear. They explore. They go and they, look at stuff and do things and talk to each other. And I've known parents who had no clue that their young person was using different softwares and was communicating to people anonymously and having different avatars and living in various worlds. So,
right.
It's important to know what the grounding is for reality, number one, what responsible use might look like, and then understanding that there should be a limit between where those worlds blend together so that they can still be healthy adults. We don't really want to interrupt.
Okay. Thank you, Angelo. Short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us, listeners.
Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Need an actionable plan to achieve your goals? Kaufman & Associates strengthens Native organizations through culturally grounded strategic planning. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Glad you're with us today on Native America Calling. I'm your host, Sean Spruce. Let's continue this discussion now about online content creators using AI to appropriate Native people and culture. Still time for listeners to join us, 1-800-996-2848. And before I introduce our next guest, Dr. Tamika Worrell, let's go ahead and take a call from Stan, who is listening in Albuquerque, New Mexico, while tuning in on KUNM Radio. Hello, Stan. You're on the air.
When I was using AI, hello?
Yeah, Stan, we can hear you.
Okay. So when I was using AI to ask questions about my tribe, I was checking the sources for its responses, and I was happy to find that the Cultural Center was one of the primary sources of its response. And so it made me think that it's very important for tribes and Indian organizations to have really good forward-presenting media presence so that when AI scans available information, that information about Indians comes primarily from an Indian source.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that will help mitigate.
Yeah, good take, Stan. Forward presenting media presence. Absolutely. Thanks for calling in. That was Stan listening in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Let's now bring in Dr. Tamika Worrell, and she joins us from Sydney in New South Wales, where she is a senior lecturer of critical Indigenous studies at Macquarie University. And Tamika, again, a very early and good morning to you. And let's talk about current discussions about AI and Indigenous people in Australia. What can you tell our listeners?
So really similarly, I was nodding my head through these previous conversations because we're having the same challenges and the same conversations in our communities. So a really prolific example of this is what's been known as the bush legend or self-described bush legend. That's a Aboriginal male persona that's presented with didgeridoo music in the background, or what we call yidaki, very clearly what we call blackface, BLAK face for Indigenous communities here. Black refers to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And what we're seeing is that people would rather engage with this fake persona than engage with Indigenous peoples directly. And when I'm reflecting on it, it's a very sad lesson for the next generation to think about how we are devalued in the society we're meant to belong to. People often describe this character as, the Indigenous Steve Irwin, with this likable kind of persona, this bubbly kind of charismatic approach, not realizing that everything that's being presented is inaccurate and coming from a New Zealand settler.
Tamika, let's go ahead and take a listen here. Let our listeners have an example. The social media profile you mentioned, Bush Legend, it features Jaron, who is an Aboriginal-looking man who talks about animals in Australia, hence the reference to Steve Irwin that you mentioned. Jaron is completely AI-generated by a non-Indigenous man who lives in New Zealand. Here's audio from a Bush Legend video about the Tasmanian devil.
This is a Tasmanian devil, and that bone tells you everything you need to know about it. Pound for pound, a Tasmanian devil's jaw can crush bone, and that's why bones aren't a problem for them. These blokes eat everything. Fur, skin, organs and bone, very little is wasted. That makes them one of Australia's most efficient clean-up crews. Those famous growls and screams are mostly arguments over food, not attacks. And it's more noise than violence. Despite being hit hard by a contagious cancer, some devils have shown natural resistance, giving conservationists hope. When devils are stressed, excited or feeding, blood rushes to their ears, making them glow red, and it's a real-time mood signal. It's illegal to harm or keep one without special permits, and they're one of Australia's most protected animals. Loud, misunderstood, and absolutely vital for nature's cleaners. If you enjoy this kind of content, hit subscribe and become a Bush Legend.
This portrayal is being called out as AI blackface, as Tamika shared with us, and the profile so far has racked up more than 200,000 followers. Tamika, do you see any place where this type of portrayal is appropriate?
I really don't. I don't think this is value add. I don't think this is value add for kind of two different communities that this person is tacking onto, right? There are Indigenous creators that people could be paying attention to, and there's also conservationists that people could be paying attention to. So this person has kind of tried to corner these two markets and bring them together ultimately for the purpose of profit. And I suppose, online clout, it is that really clickbaity, trying to draw an audience in. And, none of my uncles sound like that at all.
Mm-hmm. Tamika, this Jaron character and the image, what do you think it says about how non-Indigenous people view us as Indigenous people?
It's that classic stereotypical what they want us to look like, right? There's so many conversations about identity and skin color, but this is the palatable type of Indigenous person that wider Australia and I guess further around the globe wants to see. We're allowed to be outside, we're allowed to talk about animals, we're allowed to be painted up in a context that's really digestible, and, we're not allowed to talk about politics, but we're allowed to talk about animals.
What are the cultural details here about Jaron that AI got wrong? As an Indigenous person yourself, what's missing here?
Well, I mean, if we if we look beyond what's physically being presented, I guess ultimately this person has no accountability to any community, right? So what we're seeing is these amalgamations of different cultural elements, you know, painted up in a really white paint. I think it's meant to mimic what we would call ochre, which is a type of clay. Our ochre never looks as white as it's being presented here. Even the necklaces, it's amalgamating various different cultures to try and present this type of Indigenous person.
Tamika, what happens if someone reaches out to one of these creators, like the person who created Jaren, or even the audiences that follow a platform like this, and just says, look, you know, what you're doing here, this is morally and socially wrong. It's not benefiting Indigenous people. In fact, it's harming Indigenous people. How do they respond in your experience?
So in this particular instance, we have, and as a community, and this person has responded. And what we've seen is two things kind of happening: a denial that he is portraying an Indigenous person, so a refusal to engage in any kind of conceptualization that he is purposefully trying to represent an Aboriginal person in this instance. We're also getting, on the flip side of it, deducing any kind of genuine community critique to online noise or, you know, classic trolls, which, you know, there's very many problematic Indigenous people doing genuine call outs being called trolls on social media. You know, even I've gone back to check and I've seen that he's still using didgeridoo music in all his videos of Jaren. Like, these are very purposeful, intentional choices that he refuses to engage with community about.
And of course, like we shared earlier, a sizable following online for Jaren and some of these other characters. I guess that's the best way we can describe these AI generated people. But what about the message here, Tamika? I mean, essentially, most of these videos are all geared around animals and some sort of like a message with regard to just being a good steward of the environment. Do you see any good in terms of just that type of message as opposed to, you know, maybe directly commenting on Indigenous issues or topics?
I think there's potential to perceive some of this stuff as useful, but you know, I'm not as in tune with all of the details he's sharing about various animals. But I know there are conservationists that have called out saying the information being shared isn't even accurate. Even the pronunciation of some of our native animals is being pronounced wrong. So if we can't get the baseline information correct, how can there be a benefit happening there?
All right. How are you working to study how Indigenous people not only use AI, but also create it?
So at the moment, we're working on a project that yarns with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to see what we envision as our AI futures in this country. Really, what we're finding is wider AI studies don't actually consider Indigenous people as digital users at all. So we'd rather get the information, get the baseline data ourselves by actually having conversations with community. Do we want to know more about AI? What do we know about AI? How do we envision a future with AI? Is a Indigenous created AI elder ethical or possible in our lifetime? Really kind of interrogating what's possible for our communities and what we want to see in the future.
All right. Thank you. We've got another caller on the line. This is Jen, who is tuning in today in East Texas from her home, listening to the show online. Hi, Jen. Sorry, I almost forgot you were on the line. My bad.
Thank you so much, Sean, because as a Cherokee living here in East Texas, where people think we were just all removed to Oklahoma, and they asked me if I was born in Oklahoma, you know, and no, I was born in East Texas, where my grandmother raised 7 children, who was from Alabama. and even her history had been removed. She wasn't allowed in Alabama to call herself a Cherokee, but she was when she came to Texas, and everybody would ask her, what kind of Indian are you? And she'd probably say Cherokee. But what I have to say about the AI thing, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, because I think definitely it has its, I'm beginning to understand it has its pros and cons, just like when we started our life with our computers. And I didn't want to do even that at first, but now I have 3 and a cell phone that's a computer. So AI has been quite offensive in many ways, and I've been trying to explain to my friends when they post a chat, one of those photos of themselves that's been altered with AI. I just simply post one when I was younger and show them I didn't need it, but then also explain how much water those plants need and land, and they're going to be building up around them whether they like it or not. And in answer to what did I do to that fake posting that you mentioned earlier, when I saw it, I simply copied it with my mouse, and then I posted the image only, and I warned everybody, all the others on my Facebook, that it was a fake and to be warned about it. And then if possible, I always I did what I usually do, and I ask, I say I would like it to not see it again if it asks me if I'm interested, because they want to post things they think I'm interested in. And so it gives you an option to say, don't show this again, like they show you Fox News you might or might not want. And I just check that, and I'm totally so happy to hear from Tamika in Australia. And I've been looking at that post she was talking about, and it did seem unreal, and I felt that. But I say people want to believe what they want to believe, unfortunately, and it's sad. They just want to put Indigenous peoples away like they never existed or had a reason to. So I find this constantly every day among people around me. So we just have to keep, Tamika, just keep doing the good work and being honest with people. So thank you, Sean. I appreciate your program.
You bet, Jen, and thank you. And like you say, this is the next stage of innovation and disruption that we're facing now with AI. And Tamika, Jen compliments you and appreciates you coming on the show. And I have time for one more question. And you talked earlier about stereotypes, and I want to ask you also about when does it cross over between what we see as something that's a stereotype and when we might see something as being racist? And do you see a link there between stereotypes and racism?
Great question, and thank you for that wonderful compliment, Jin, as well. What we're kind of looking at is historically we have not gotten to control our own stories. Globally, as Indigenous people, we've had stories told about us, and these these stereotypes have permeated online through communities, through generations, and it's that really fine line about what point does it become racist. I think, looking at the other example we looked at, the fact that it's called satire or parody, for me, seeing that, it's I find it so offensive. Whereas there's a really kind of deep-seated kind of positioning that we're seeing with the Bush legend that distance itself from any genuine critique, right? And as soon as someone's profiting from something and drawing on our likeness, our knowledges to profit, I think we're seeing a whole new ball game of what we're actually dealing with here. I mean, culturally offensive, absolutely. I don't know if Bush legend has crossed into the racist zone, but again, at the end of the day, if we're calling this AI blackface, which I do, that's automatically racialized, right? And we're automatically seeing racism perpetuated on this site. we're seeing comments that say, oh, you're one of the good ones. You're a good Indigenous person, followed by slurs or putting down other Indigenous people that are not like the bush legend. So it's really complicated, but a really good question.
All right. Thank you so much, all of our guests who joined us today, Dr. Angela Obaka, Trevor Reed, and of course, Dr. Tamika Worrell, who we were just speaking with. Join us again tomorrow on Native America Calling, when we'll take time to honor the late Osage Nation Principal Chief Jim Gray. I'm Sean Spruce. Enjoy the rest of your day.
The faculty of tribal colleges and universities support their students in countless ways. They say I believe and offer help before it's asked.
Hear that? That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, cheer progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate healing.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.